participants. Thank you so much. We are recording this session so that we can post these videos on YouTube. If you have any colleagues or friends that could not make this presentation, please let them know. And we will be editing and posting this video within a week of today. You'll notice in the chat that Amparo, my colleague, has dropped in our sign-in link for today and our agenda. You could have those up on your browser. That would be great. All right, so we expect folks to come and trickle in, as we present. Last time, I think we were close to 30 participants. So we will catch folks up as they join. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement. We always start our workshops with a land acknowledgement because UCLA is a land grant institution like many of the universities and colleges in California. And as such, we recognize that the Tongva Gabrielino peoples are the traditional caretakers of the unceded territory that was originally known as Gar, or today is the Los Angeles Basin to the Southern Channel Islands. And you see a screenshot there that was taken from a great article that's still online from the LA Times that kind of highlights some of the villages, and it's like a really great story map about Tolongar. And we also have a resource to share with you, and I will put that in the chat right now. A lot of you have heard of this resource. It's called nativeland.ca, so it's a Canadian website, and it uses GPS in your location to determine whose native land. Whoops, I sent that directly to one person, to determine whose native land your school, your community are on. So you could use that with your students to design a land acknowledgement, maybe perhaps have it up in your classroom. Right. This is a QR code to sign in. So if you haven't had a chance to sign in, you can just kind of hold your phone up to the screen real quick and sign in through the magic of technology. Hey, and final thing for logistics today, our agenda. Our agenda has been put in the chat. If anybody needs it, just let us know in the chat or unmute. But we recommend having the agenda up in a tab as well as we go through. It's just a good way to keep track of what we're doing and where we're going. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pass this to my colleague Amparo, who's going to tell you a little bit about our project.
Hello, everyone. I want to also share some more land acknowledgement sources with you that we have been collecting. A great one from San Marcos has a more extensive way for you to think about land acknowledgements and what should go into them and what they should look like and how you want to reach out to other folks, to indigenous communities or in your area. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is to please practice what we call BAC, and that is being brave, being open, and being caring. We know that we are going to be looking at some really interesting pieces today, and we also know that you've been working a long day, and so if you need to get up, get some water, please feel free to do so. We do kindly ask you, to please turn on your cameras as much as you can. We know some of you are driving, so that we can, one, see your beautiful faces, and two, your colleagues in breakout rooms can see your beautiful, wonderful faces and hear and connect what you're saying to a visual, okay? But please, if you need to get up, we oftentimes have Zoom meetings when we're walking around with our with our computers in our hands. So if that's what you need to do today, feel free to do that. I also want to share with you that we are part of two larger organizations. One is the UCLA Center X, which is the intersection where theory and practice come together, and we're in the School of Education at Center X. Center X was created as a response to the Rodney King uprisings, and all former school teachers. And we're also part of a larger statewide network of the California Subject Matter Projects, which is the California History Social Studies Project. And so we are here today representing those two organizations. Today we're being funded in part by some money that the CHSSP received. And so we're excited to recognize that. Next slide. And this is a little bit of us flexing some muscles and sharing with you some of the wonderful partners that we've been working with throughout the years and the work that we do with them. We work with community collaborators, museums, professors, county office of ed folks, and then we also work directly with school districts. One of our largest school district right now is LAUSD, and we've been working with them looking at history, social studies, instruction, and ethnic studies. And we're very, very proud. Today we're going to share a couple of our lessons from one collaboration with Lost LA and another one with the Compton Unified School District. So we're excited to show you some of that work. Next slide. This is our team, and we're very excited. Mark is joining us. He's the glue that keeps us together, especially during Zoom meetings. Cindy Mata, our associate director, is not with us today. She teaches a TP class tomorrow, and usually Thursday evenings are her time to prep for that class. And I'm here. I'm Amparo Chavez Gonzalez, and I've been an educator for 32 years. I'm taught 3rd through 12th graders, and I grew up in LA. I'm very excited to be here and to share with you guys some of the thinking we've been doing. And then Danny.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I was speaking earlier. My name is Danny Diaz. I'm the director of this project here at UCLA. I'm a former high school history teacher in Roosevelt High School and then El Rancho High School in Pico Rivera. I've been here at UCLA for almost 9 years. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. We also have some teacher leaders that we're going to introduce. Oops, sorry about that.
All right. And then these are our wonderful teacher leaders. We have teacher leaders that come and work with us. Some of them are still in the classroom. Some of them have moved on to do other work, but we're excited. We are constantly in collaboration with them to bring materials to you. And you're going to see examples from 3 of our teacher leaders today. And we're very excited. And so, sorry, that's my kid in the background turning on the AC.
You want me to take this one, Amparo?
I got it. Sorry, it distracted me. So part of this series is here because we know that recently there's been a lot of conversations about young people in our nation falling behind. And a huge part of this is the conversation about how the pandemic impacted it. And so there's been some additional efforts to help and support teachers and students and families to try to alleviate some of what has been happening and to alleviate some of the concerns that a lot of folks throughout the country have. Danny?
And along those lines, we at the UCLA History Geography Project believe that culturally I didn't want to do that without being unmuted. We believe that you can't really separate literacy and skill development from the humanity of the students that we teach. And so we believe that culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogies go hand in hand with the conversations that we're about to have in terms of student engagement, applicability, relevance of the content, and the kind of pedagogy that we're using when we are working with all of our students, including English learners. Yep, so we have this great quote here that comes, that talks a little bit about culturally sustaining pedagogy. Just for reference, culturally sustaining pedagogy is an update to culturally responsive pedagogy. Originally, Django Paris and Samuel Lean, who's a UCLA colleague of ours, coined this term, published a book, and Gloria Ladson-Billings, who came up with culturally responsive pedagogy, has since remixed, these are her words, her scholarship, and she has published one about culturally sustaining pedagogy. So we are more and more using that word to sustain, right? Like the whole idea of sustaining the culture of our community and of our students, it just becomes part of how we teach. So I'm gonna move ahead to some outcomes. And so we are here. I'm sorry, folks. It's allergy season. If I clear my throat in your ears, I'm so sorry about that. I don't mean to. So here are our outcomes for this workshop. We are collaborating with you all, from former teachers to current teachers, to first explore what these connections are between having a good rigorous classroom and developing literacy, and also keeping our students engaged and practicing culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies. And our other goal is to then explore resources and share resources and strategies with you all that are culturally responsive, relevant, engaging, and rigorous. And so I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Amparo, who's going to do the inclusion activity.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to engage in a literacy scavenger hunt, and I wanted to share with you some of the questions that we want you to be thinking about as you look at these 3 lesson examples, right? The last time we talked a lot about those connections between engagement and inquiry, literacy, and well, we briefly shared those lessons. So we want to give you a chance to look again. So what you're going to get the opportunity to do is to look at 3 lessons, and we want you to look at them with these questions in mind. How do the inquiry questions in these lessons lead to specific literacy skills to be practiced or developed in students? And what do you notice about the content and literacy scaffolds used in the lessons? And if you could go to the next slide, Danny. So you're going to be have the opportunity to look at 3 lessons from our teacher leaders. I'm copying the slide. So one of them I wrote actually, is how do we think about remembering Charlie Parkhurst? How do we think about the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which was written by Diana Phillips, one of our teacher leaders? And the last one is around a Lost LA lesson around the Shenandoah toy factory. And I just said mark the link to the folder, but not you guys. So there's the link to the folder. We're gonna give you a nice chunk of time to explore the lessons, keeping these questions in mind. Okay, so we're gonna give you, I would say, a good, let me see. You're gonna get a good 9 minutes to explore these, okay? They're extensive and they have a lot of sources, so don't feel like, oh my God, I have to go through all of them. You might want to pick one and go deep in one, okay? If you want to turn off your camera, feel free to do so. We are going to return at 4:54. If anyone has any questions, please let us know. Are all those links working? Yes, somebody? Yes, perfect. Okay, Danny is going to turn on some music. And then when Danny turns the music off, you know it's time for you to return, right? Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. That was 9 minutes, a little over 9 minutes. Hopefully you got an opportunity to explore these lessons in some depth. And if you recall, Amparo asked a couple of questions. The first one was about the scaffolds and what you noticed about the scaffolds and the inquiry questions, also how they lead to specific literacy skills that are being practiced in these lessons. So we're going to spend a few minutes here just kind of debriefing. We would love to hear from you. We are small enough where you can unmute and talk with us. If you prefer to chat, you can do that as well. So anybody notice anything as it relates to the inquiry questions and the literacy or the kind of scaffolds that were used in these lessons, or anything else that you noticed that you would like to mention? Thank you, Robin. I see that. Scaffolding words, terms, and other background information before the reading begins. Ensure students are not distracted or confused. Agreed. Hillary is saying scaffolding by starting with a personal connection or application related to the inquiry question. Mhm. That's some good culturally responsive practice right there, right?
Yeah.
Tapping into prior information, but using something that's like sort of applicable to the lives of our students is really smart. Michelle, students are reading, writing, speaking, and listening to text. Jessica says scaffolding by having students draw what they are reading. Yes. Would anybody else like to comment? You are more than welcome to comment on the content of those lessons as well. If you want to, ask a question or anything like that. Thank you, Ernesto. Sentence stems. Okay. Well,
Yeah, if
I think
anyone has questions, yeah, also feel free to ask. I know there might be some content questions. Sorry, Daddy.
no problem. But if there are no more questions, we can definitely move forward. So as I said at the very beginning of this workshop today, last time we were looking at reading, and today we're looking at speaking and listening. So we're about to jump into the two strategies for today. Amparo's going to show you the first strategy, which is one of my favorite strategies when I was a teacher. And then after that, we're going to debrief, spend some time talking about that strategy and its applicability. And then I will be showing you another strategy that was pretty popular in my classroom. All of them speaking and listening centered. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and first read this comment, and then I'm going to pass it to my colleague. So I'm seeing here that Roberto says having an opportunity to look at different sources and opportunities to try out speaking and listening to other students is something that he noticed. And Faith is commenting on the Lost LA lesson, personal connections from beginning to end, students engaged in the materials using multiple modalities, higher order thinking, analyzing inferences, reflection, wonder. Scaffolding begins with teacher modeling the whole group and moves to smaller group partner work and then individual work. Yes, thank you for seeing that, Faith. Okay, keep those comments coming. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to my colleague Amparo.
All right. So we've been thinking a lot about the idea. A lot of us have done a tea party, right? Especially those of us who did the whole like meet the philosophers, right? The Enlightenment philosophers, and the kids had to have their little masks, right? And so we've been thinking about a lot about like how do we ramp up that tea party, right? And we've been having conversations about like um, I don't think any of us ever had tea, right? We're not British, right? Most of us or don't have that experience, right? Maybe cafecito in the middle of the day or something like that, right? So we were trying to figure out a name. So if any of you can help us come up with a more culturally, I wanted to call it the hanging out time, right? Or the chilling time or something, right? Like, but it's different now because a lot of times the meeting and greeting folks is online through social media. So that was our struggle here as us thinking about a good name that updates this thinking about the meet and greet. And so we wanted to share with you cafecito time. Yeah, that's what we were thinking, right? It's cafecito time. It's maybe it's get on your phone, or it's social media time. I don't know. I don't know anymore, right? Um, there you go. So one of the ways that we want to think about this is what is this meet and greet really offer us an opportunity, right? And many of us know that our students, because we know kids are struggling to read and engagement, this is a way for us to think about, instead of lecturing, delivering content where kids are taking ownership that content and sharing it with one another. It's also a way for ELs to have a smaller piece of thinking and writing that they're engaged with. And then it's also a way to practice some of those inference skills and develop evidence. And we're going to talk to you about the connection to the Big Six, right? Which is another framework for thinking about history instruction that we've been working with. And then it's, for me, the one way that we thought about this was how do we ramp this up? And it's really about like how do we connect students to the lives of people in the past and currently to activists? So we created a meet and greet about looking at 5 activists in time. And for us, it was also a way to think about like, what do activists have to say to young people who are thinking about becoming activists and making an impact in their communities? And so we want to share this with you. So this is what it is. Next, Danny. Danny's going to talk a little about the Big Six and how he thinks about historical thinking concepts.
Yeah, thank you, Amparo. So this meet and greets, or tea parties, we're calling them meet and greets, help students really engage with content in a kind of a creative way. And there's also opportunities here for students to continue to develop what we call a historical consciousness, right? We talk a lot about being intentional as history teachers with not only developing skills, but developing a sort of mental capacity to see the past through the lenses that historians see the past and apply it to the present. And so we often reference this scholarship called the Big Six that comes out from Peter Satius, and it's actually a Canadian scholarship, but it's really good. And so I have taken 2 of the 6 concepts here, and I've screenshotted them. So the first one is historical perspectives, right? How can we understand better the people of the past, right? This is something that historians think often about. And so for this activity, you'll notice that I've highlighted guideposts 4 and 5. I believe that those are really applicable to the activity that we're about to get into. And I just want to point out that one of the things that guidepost 4 talks about is that taking the perspective of a historical character means to infer, right? To think about how they felt and thought in the past. There's a caution about identifying with those actors, but making inference based on evidence. And Amparo's going to talk more about the walk and talk and how they're evidence-based. And then the other part is looking at different historical characters helps us better understand the past, right? What was going on when we look at different perspectives. And we talk about this with the FAIR Act and sort of having culturally responsive and classrooms in history. More perspectives gives us students better understanding of what was going on in the past. The second concept is this ethical dimension, which is a really challenging dimension for a lot of history teachers, but it's having the students think about how history can help us live in the moment that we're currently in. And so again, I've highlighted 2 guideposts, 3 guideposts, 2 and 3, and then guidepost 5. Guidepost 5 is something that I do want to, or guidepost 3 is something that I do want to point out to you all. This idea of making ethical judgments, but sort of being cautious of imposing contemporary standards of right and wrong. And we really think that that happens in conversation with students. And so Amparo is going to go ahead and sort of walk you through this. Actually, I have one more to share, and then Amparo is going to walk you through this. We have added to the Big Six, so we call it the Big Six plus 1. And what we've added is this activist dimension. In the question that we often grapple with is, how can the study of history help us work towards equity and justice in our society? And when we're doing these meet and greets, especially this one that Amparo created about activism, it's really helpful, I think, for students to sort of learn about these powerful women and sort of what they were up against and how they took a stand as lessons, as inspiration, not as exactly applying to that to today, but what can we learn, right? How can we learn and how can we build this thing called critical hope, right? The hope that things will improve based on the efforts of people of the past. So I wanted to point that out to you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to my colleague. And if you have any questions about this, just ask in the chat.
Danny, I'm not sure I put the right link in for the Big Six. I hope it's the right one, but it looks weird. So can you check it?
Yeah, I'll double check right now.
I was like, wait, it looks strange. So yes, thank you. As we, technical difficulties in the background. So one of the ways that we wanted to make sure that you all have the tools that you need to document that you're engaged in this work and doing literacy. I don't know about your classrooms, but there are times when people walked into my classroom and there was a lot of talking, right? And there was a lot of movement and people were like, where's the teacher? What are you teaching? And so I really always want to make sure that teachers have how this connects to literacy and showing folks how it also connects to the culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. And so I wrote down for you the writing standards that this connects to in terms of Common Core. and reading, right? Um, Especially like determining words and vocabulary, which I know I struggled with because I was not good at memorizing vocabulary, but I know that I needed to put up there and expose students to it. And so we're always mindful of that. And then Danny, next slide. I also made sure that you could see the speaking and listening standards that this connects to, as well as the ELD standards, right? So that, again, especially for those of you who are wondering, how do I document this in a lesson plan, or how do I share this with my administrators if they come in when I'm doing this? You have that already there for you, so you can share it with them and rely on it. And then next. All right. So why, right? It's a jigsaw. It's a way of getting kids to read some stuff, but not have this large amount of reading, right? You can scaffold it. You can also think about which of those meet and greet pieces you want to give to different kids who may not have, the vocabulary, or who need a reading, or someone who doesn't have this, long history and titles and names in it. It also invites kids to get in the shoes of other historical figures, right? For me, we also use it because it shows kids that there have been other folks who have exercised resiliency and agency, and that they can connect to those people in the past, right? How is it? It's not all about like, oh my God, think about all these horrible things that have happened and continue to happen. But there's also people who have tried to do something about it, and many of them have made impacts in the world. And then it helps young people to see this connection themselves as part of history, right? They're part of that journey to make society better. And so we want to encourage them to see themselves as part of that, right? And so next slide. So what have we done? Mark, I told you he's the glue behind the scenes. Mark has renumbered every single one of you. And right now, you're going to see that if you are number 1, you're going to be reading about Alice Paul. If you are number 2, you're going to be reading about Audre Lorde. If you're number 3, you're going to read about Clara Elizabeth Chan Lee. If you're number 4, you're going to read about Luisa Moreno. And if you're number 5, you're going to read about Polly Murray. Okay. And so we're going to give you, again, we're going to give you a good 8 minutes to read your character. But then the second piece of this, Danny, if you can go to the graphic organizer, can you click on it at the bottom? We're going to ask you to make a copy. And then you have a graphic organizer, and we're going to ask you to please fill out for your character, what are the things that stand out to you about this person? What life or systemic challenges did this person encounter or overcome? And then how has this individual been working to improve the lives of others in their community or communities? Okay, so you have a graphic organizer. You need to make a copy of the graphic organizer because it's yours, and you want to fill it out for your particular character. When we call time, you will come back, and then you'll go into a breakout room to discuss with other colleagues and talk about the other characters. So we'll do you'll do a meet and greet where you'll introduce your character to other people. Okay. Any questions so far? Are we all finding our person that our number corresponds to? Yes. Yes, I see thumbs up. Thank you. Wonderful. And so Dania, we can come back. I have that it's 5:09. So we want to send you off for 8 minutes. We'll come back at 5:18. If you have any questions, if you're having a hard time with any of the documents or anything like that, let us know. If you want to turn off your camera and do some work individually, that's also great too. Make sure you also are practicing self-care. All right. Danny, if you could pause the music and we can invite folks to come back. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I hope I gave you enough time. I know a lot of you are fast readers and you probably looked at some of the other biographies, which is perfectly fine. You will notice that this document is for you. And at the end of it, we've collected lots of other activists, women activists specifically, and some male, that you can rely on and create your own meet and greet. And also some of the collections that we've created in the past that are meet and greet or Tea Party activist collections are all in there for you to use and try out with your students. So we now want to invite you to go into breakout rooms. And what we're going to do is Mark has created your breakout rooms. And however you guys want to work it out, each one of you will have 2 minutes to introduce your person. And, you know, if you want to, more than welcome to pretend that you are that character. I have an example here that if I was in the breakout room, I would say, hi, I'm Eleanor Roosevelt, and I was married to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, and the one who served the longest. Even though I grew up in a well-to-do family, I cared greatly about the poor, the sick, and the women's rights and the rights of people of color. My parents died at an early age, and I was raised by relatives. In spite of having 6 children, it was known that both my husband and I had extramarital affairs. I helped reshape what others thought of the first ladies because I was politically involved, voiced my opinions, had a newspaper, and in fact, I served one of the UN commissions as well. So this is how I would do it. You're more than welcome to do it differently. If you look at your graphic organizer, there's sentence stems. If you feel like you want to use those, practice them to see how they might work for your students. You can also use that. And then if somebody's stuck, we included some questions that also you could use to generate that person from getting a little unstuck on the graphic organizer. Okay, so you're going to get 10 minutes in your group to share, and then we'll send out a banner and we're going to ask you to discuss one of the 3 topics, right? And you're going to get about 5 minutes. And the 3 topics are: how would your character respond to Don't Say Gay, the pay discrepancy, and I already forgot the other one. Danny, can we go back to the graphic organizer? And the lack of childcare for women, especially during the pandemic. So first, you're going to introduce yourselves, then you're going to pick one of these 3 and have a conversation with one another. Okay? Any questions? I think there's one group that doesn't have as many people. Don't sweat it. Just present the 3 that you have and then move on to the conversation. Okay? Yeah, and it's okay. I tried to beef up the meet and greet so you had enough information about them. All right, we're going to open up breakout rooms, and both Dania and I might jump in just to hear and see how it's going. So have a wonderful time in breakout rooms. Great. We think most of you are back. Oh, I think we lost one person. There's a couple of folks who had trouble with their cameras or their mics, so we know that it took us a little longer than we wanted to. The last piece of it would have been for you to have some reflective writing time, and that is also in your actual organizer, right? Thinking about, so what would my character think about the conversation I had with the other characters? And then ultimately, how would they respond to one of these 3 issues? And as an extension, you can have young people write some more about that and think about what advice, would these activists give young people about being activists today. So, Danny?
Thanks, Amps. So we're going to go ahead and spend some time debriefing this. I'm curious to hear what you all thought, any questions that you might have. This is enough. I have a couple of things I want to point out too, if time permits. So we'll see. Does anybody have a comment, question about the meet and greet activity?
I thought it was really good. I was mentioning that my students are part of a performing arts magnet. So something like this would give them an opportunity to kind of embrace a role, even if they've never heard this person speak. They might work on some accents or some theatrical, add some theatrics to it. I have a similar assignment called a raft, where the students they write a document and they select the role, audience, what's the F stand for? Format and topic, so they can kind of choose what they're going to actually write. And so it's also it reminded me a lot of that program, so looking forward to using it. Are there other bundles that we can access, bundles of personages?
Yeah, we have like a series of these. The one that comes to mind is like one about Central American women. We have one about progressives. And it's just really whenever you come to a unit in your class where you see, oh, there's a lot of historical characters in this unit, like the Great Depression unit. Those are really good opportunities to think about content being delivered through a walk and talk. And you can also find, a meet and greet. You could also find tea parties and walk and talks online. I'm forgetting the name of the website, but there's one on the Mexican Revolution that has like all the revolutionaries ready to go. All the biographies are there, and you could use it with our graphic organizer. If I find that in our drive, I'll definitely share it.
And what I did was I collated a whole bunch of those tea parties that we've already created, the meet and greets, and others that I found online. And I looked for some that were for elementary, some for middle school. I kind of varied. So if you look at some of them and you're like, oh, these are too short, it's probably because I was thinking elementary and mixing it up. And some of them have repeated names as well. There's a good 2 pages at the end of it with links for you to check out other ones. Yeah, the World Cafe. Yeah, definitely. Yes. Thank you. Yes, that World Cafe method. Thanks.
I liked how this strategy incorporated an accountability piece also.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, because if you were doing this with your students, we had to teach one another about it. So there was that accountability of actually doing your work, and then everyone else is going to be listening to you talk about like what you learned. So there was like critical thinking in there. There was accountability. There was that individual work. So I liked that.
Yeah, that's also something that's really great about this. There's a couple of things that I want to point out because we do want to give you a break. There's a couple of things that I want to point out. The first thing is when I would do this in the classroom, the way that it would work is I would have anywhere from like 15 to 20, and then I would have like these little strips or the half sheets of paper. Students would sort of read, and then I would have them script out, right? Because I taught a lot of English learners. Script out what you're going to say. And then I would have them just kind of huddle up with like, if there was another version of your character in the class, I would just have them really quickly huddle up to just check that everybody's giving the same information. Because sometimes when you have multiple versions of the same character, I've seen them give the wrong information or incorrect. So I would do that. And then at that point, after that, it's just like everybody's up and everybody's walking and talking, and I would play music, and it's just like it's like a tea party, like a party. And then at the end, what I would do is I would just kind of do a quick debrief to make sure that all the facts are accurate. The second thing I want to point out is that sometimes these can create some pitfalls, right? So the first one is I've seen in my class where sometimes some of the boy students who are women will be like, oh, they would like, inflect their voice or kind of act silly. And I would have to, kind of check them and let them know. Or the comment about like accents, I would always tell my students, don't pretend to, talk like another student from a different ethnic group, historical character, don't do that because it could insult somebody in class. So one of the things that you can do if you're not comfortable having students talk like the historical character themselves is just to say, I represent, or I'm representing, this character. I don't think it's as engaging that way, but it also, I mean, there's pros and cons to both, but I would just be kind of wary of that.
Well, this. Speaking that one.
We got some audio issues.
Oh, I was gonna go over there. Oh man, okay. Hello?
I think we have two Zooms in the same room.
All right. Oh, real quick, I just want to say the acting out of the parts would be awesome for the shot. I'm thinking about my class. You have some shy kids who really aren't as shy as one would think. And this time to act out is their time to shine. Because in the theater, the saying is every child is entitled to hear the roar of the applause. So this kind of activity would be awesome to get those kids middle of the road to participate, to engage, to articulate, and for them to hear the roar of the crowd from their peers.
Thank you for saying that, Ms. Quayle. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Any other comments or questions?
Do you want to go to the next slide, Danny?
Sure, some extension ideas. Go ahead, Amps.
And so we thought that you could take this in a lot of different ways, right? Hearing Mr. Quayle say, hearing with Faith and Robin have been put in there, right? How could you connect some of these, maybe present 5 and then have your students research some other current activists, right? Have them look more into if you're at high school, have them look into what was the context for when these folks were doing this activism and what was going on in the country, right? I would also maybe have the kids write a poem, a play, or a skit if you want to have an extension around the lives of the characters. And then, of course, we have a lot of young people who are really good with art and creating videos and creating, my kid loves to edit and create videos to music. Invite them to do something like that as well, where they're taking these ideas and again, applying them and creating something new, especially those of you who have the ability at schools that are art related and so on. So we want to encourage that thinking and that playing with this and extending it to become something that students are using way more, right? Yeah, a blackout poetry. There you go. Yeah, I think that would be great, right?
That would be cool. Yeah.
We love it. So we have 5:44, right? And I think we're going to send you into a breakout room for how long, Danny?
We're gonna do a
break.
a break in your own rooms. We'll do it for 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 5:50, and then at that point, I'm gonna introduce our second strategy, and we'll see how far along we could get into the strategy. But we're also really excited about this one. It's a really engaging one. So enjoy some music, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. All right, such a great song. Sorry to have to pause it midway through, but we are back. It's also 5:50, folks, so we are on our way. And we want to just kind of keep this going. We have one more strategy that we're happy to show you. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the strategy. I'm going to talk to you about when to use it, why to use it, the literacy components there, and then we'll practice. We'll engage in the activity like we did for the last one. So this strategy is known as the DBQ Poster. It's a pretty popular strategy, so there's a good chance that you've heard of this. DBQ posters are often used in US history classrooms, world history classrooms. I think they were first used in AVID and then AP classrooms. DBQ, if you're not aware, is a document-based question. That's a term that was coined by the College Board for the type of essay that students write or used to write on I think it's still there, the DBQ, where it's like 6 to 10 sources and they have to corroborate them and write a essay. If you know that if you've done that or if you taught that, it's a very complex strategy. It's a very rigorous strategy that requires a lot of scaffolds. And so this is a great scaffold to have students prepare for some more in-depth writing. And so what we're doing here is intentional because our last session, which is next week, is going to be focused on writing. So let's talk about this scaffold, which is a great speaking and listening scaffold as strategy as well. So what is the DBQ poster? Document-based question poster is an inquiry-driven collaborative strategy where students analyze and corroborate primary sources in a collective effort to answer an inquiry question. So it's students working together as a team. They're given a question, they're given a set of sources, and they sort of analyze them together. Right? Here's an example of one that came out of some work that we did back in 2017. This is from a teacher named Tara Ragsdale, and she had a 7th grade world history class, and she was teaching about Mansa Musa. So she asked them this inquiry question. The students got into groups. They got a little creative, and they organized their sources. They annotated them. And then if you look closely, they even wrote a thesis statement at the very bottom. Right? So what kind of literacy connections are we seeing here? And again, I'm just going to show you. And then if you want to take a screenshot, or we'll share these slides with you, you can sort of see this, the strategies or the literacy connections there. But you'll see that we kind of hit on all the literacy skills for the Common Core in terms of writing and reading here. And then we also have some good speaking and listening. Literacy, I don't know what's going on with my, there we go. So we see some speaking and listening. Right, students here are collaborative in their discussions. There's a lot of one-on-one and group conversations, and they're really discussing the sources and kind of questioning one another and wondering about what kind of evidence they're looking at. And as they're doing that, they're evaluating the point of view and of the author or the artist of the primary sources that they're looking at. We also have some good ELD standards embedded in this activity. And so you'll see them there. Collaborative, it's very collaborative. We know how important that is for our English learners to be able to work in groups and communicate with one another. They get to interpret and ask questions about what they're hearing, and it's a productive, it's also productive in that students are supporting their opinions by evaluating the other people's opinions or arguments. And that's really important part of this as well. Okay, and then like last time, what are the kind of thinking that our students do? We know the skills. What kind of thinking are students doing in document-based questions? Well, this one's really about evidence, right? Because they're looking at all of these sources. And evidence is really like how historians know what they know about the past, right? We have different kinds of evidence. So you'll see the kind of the 3 guideposts that I've highlighted for you there. Right, so students are going to make some inferences and interpretation. They're going to interpret and infer about some of the primary sources that they're looking at. It talks about the kinds of primary sources that there are. Sourcing is very important here. And then taking an inference from one source shouldn't stand alone, right? They should be done in comparison to other pieces of evidence. And that's what we have going on here. The other kind of thinking that shows up in this lesson is really about the kind of inquiry question you ask your students. And so you'll notice when I get there, the inquiry that we're asking is really about cause and consequence. And those kinds of questions work really well for a DBQ poster, and I'll explain why in about a slide or two. Right? And so my computer is slowing down, but I'm going to walk you through the steps if my computer can speed up. I animated the slide, now I'm regretting it. There we go. Okay, so it didn't animate, they popped up. So here's the steps, right? And we're going to walk through these first 2 steps together. I'd always do the first 2 steps with my class. So the first one is, what is the inquiry question and what is it asking? Those of you who work with English learners, you know that sometimes we underestimate or we overestimate the question complexity. And sometimes we need to stop and just make sure that we're clarifying terms and what we mean when we say certain things, right? Sometimes things don't translate into other languages the way we think they do. And then the second part is you got to consider what's the context of this question. If this question is about the 1920s in California, well, then what was happening during that time? What do students know about that? Let's tap into some prior knowledge about the topic. And once we do that, then they go into their groups and they start reading the sources and analyzing or annotating them. This is done on butcher paper. So if we were together in a room, we would all have butcher paper. You would get your set of sources, and then the students get to like read and annotate and then cut them out. And then they get to organize them and sort them. What are the categories? This is evidence for this is evidence for that, right? And then they sort of glue them on their poster. And then at the very end, they collaborate on a thesis. And so what you have is all your evidence, all your outside information, your annotation, and then you got a thesis, and it sets up nicely for a longer writing activity. So we're gonna do the first two steps together. And before I do that, actually, let me just put in the chat. Actually, no, Mark did it. Thank you, Mark. Mark dropped the directions to the DBQ poster in the chat. Thank you for doing that, Mark. He's on top of it. Okay, so step one, here's the inquiry question. What were the costs and benefits of Los Angeles urban growth in the 1920s? So my first question to you is, knowing your students, what terms might trip them up in this question? If you want to unmute and share, just put it in the chat, you can.
Cost, they might be focused only on like the fiscal aspect, not so much how it affects people, maybe.
Exactly. Yes, I thought the same thing, right? I thought the same thing. This cost has more of a negative attachment to it, right? The way that it's being used here. And if a student thinks cost is just like monetary, then this might throw them off. Right? Growth. Oh, that's a good one. I didn't think about that. Growth. Yeah, Jessica, we might need to clarify, what is growth when we're talking about that? Yeah, what do you mean by urban growth? So thinking about my practice, I thought these three terms might need to be defined. And so costs here, we're talking about like the impact, right? We're talking about like sort of the negative impact of urban growth. The benefits would be the positive things. And then, yeah, urban growth, we're talking about the sort of growing of a city, the building of a city, right, over the course of time. And so you'd want to clarify that with your students before you move into the next part. So we've sort of done step one together. Usually in class, this takes a little bit longer, but you know, we're short on time and we're good. So we're going to move forward. So the next part then is to consider the historical context and then create a list of relevant facts. We're going to do that part together, right? And so what I'm going to ask you right now is to think about this question and to access your own prior knowledge, right? And you can start typing in the chat, just don't hit send yet. Right? What do you know about the 1920s and urban growth? Maybe you know a little bit of Los Angeles urban growth in the 1920s, but if I was doing this lesson in the classroom, I would show my students an episode from Lost LA from where this lesson comes from the day before. So they would have some of this knowledge, some of this prior knowledge that they can draw from. So I'm gonna play a 4-minute clip for you. And as you're listening, you can go ahead and jot down some notes in the chat or anywhere else. And these will be some of the outside information that you're bringing with you to this particular activity, to this DBQ poster. So let me just cue up the video for you.
Union Bank is
Can we hear that? Okay.
proud to support Lost LA.
LA's always evolving, and as it changed, LA's population exploded in the early 20th century. What was in 1900 a large town of 100,000 grew by 1930 into a metropolis of 1.2 million. But where would all these new Angelenos live? To house them, developers exploited the natural wealth of the Golden State, building countless single-family homes from a material both ancient and beautiful, the California redwood.
Today, if you think of Los Angeles, you think of like concrete, freeways, palm trees. You don't think of redwood at all. What most Angelenos don't know is that 100 years ago, redwood in California was used for basically everything. The story of the redwoods is not just about tree sitters and hippies and loggers and environmentalists and up there, way up north in Humboldt County. It's a California story that unites all parts of the state. The question is not where Californians would encounter redwood, but where would they not encounter redwood? Let's say if you were an Angelino in the early 20th century and you want to go to the beach. So you would ride a trolley that's going on a rail that's on redwood ties. You are passing thousands of oil derricks. All those oil derricks are mostly made of redwood. You get to the beach, the boardwalk and the pier are made of redwood. If you look out at the port, that was probably largely built with redwood pilings. It was used as paving material, as sidewalk material. It was used for telegraph and telephone poles, as pencils, as toys, as boxes, as decking and siding and shingling, fencing material. It was basically used for all purposes. Californians, literally from cradle to grave, could be in redwood. I mean, many Californians in the early 20th century would have been rocked as babies in redwood cradles. And then in the mid-20th century, it was very common to be buried 6 feet under in redwood caskets that were advertised by lumber companies and funeral homes as everlasting wood, right? Bury your loved ones in everlasting wood.
When the earliest settlers came to California in the 1840s, 1850s for the gold rush, they found a forest that had been growing here for millions of years, with trees that were over 2,000 years old. They found this spectacular forest and thought it went on forever. And they thought it would be a resource that would supply the growing communities of California in perpetuity. And so a tree here and a tree there led to the dramatic clear cutting of most of the ancient redwood forest.
In the early decades of redwood logging, they were just like extracting from the forest a little bit of each tree and just completely wasting the rest. So it meant leaving an enormous stump, and they didn't even deal with the top part with all the branches. They're just interested in the lower like third of the tree that had the best wood. So they would cut down the tree and then they would just burn the whole forest.
It's a great episode. It's really engaging. So I'm gonna pause it there. And what I'm gonna ask what I'm asking you all to do now is to think about some prior knowledge that you have. Perhaps you knew something about urban growth in LA prior to the video, but you learned a little bit about the redwood and how it aided it. So if you all can just in the chat, maybe just put like 1 to 2 facts that you learned and then just hit send. And what we're going to do is sort of collectively have waterfall and do a waterfall. We're going to collectively have a list of good outside information that we're going to bring with us as we analyze these sources, right? Again, accessing prior knowledge and how important that is in culturally responsive teaching and in building literacy. Hey, thank you, Ernesto. I see that. Yes. Very good. Yeah, excellent. I love that they're talking about how ancient the redwoods were. Sometimes I think we forget that America is an ancient place, right? We've had dinosaurs here and these ancient redwoods, and the Clovis people are some of the earliest tool makers. So it's a very ancient a place that we live. So great. So we have some background knowledge, and so now the next piece of this is for us to read and analyze the sources, and then to sort and corroborate, right? Glue them, we're not going to glue them here, but to sort of organize these into the categories. And so the categories here are going to be costs and benefits. And that's why I said the cause and consequence questions are really good for DBQ posters when you're first using them. You can definitely use more nuanced questions that don't give students the categories and have them grapple with evidence more. But I would start here just to help them, as a scaffold. Okay, so here is an example from my classroom. They had a great time. I know their faces don't reveal this. This is period 1, so you all know how that was. But this is an example from my class way back in 20-something. And but you'll see that this is sort of done on poster, right? But because we're not in person, we've adapted this for you using Google Slides. And this is what your what your primary source poster is going, or your document-based question poster, I'm sorry, is going to look like when you get into your breakout room. You're going to jump into a breakout room with 3 other people, and you're going to interact on this Google slide. We're going to share with you a bunch of slide decks. And so let me show you how this works. So the first thing you're going to do, and I'm going to stop in presenter mode, and then I'm going to just quickly type on this so you can see for yourself how this works. And I'm sorry, folks, I have a very slow Wi-Fi right now. So here you go. So the first thing when you get onto your slides with your group is you'll type in the prompt here, what were the costs, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going to start looking at the sources. And so the way we've set this up is that each one of these boxes represents a source from this lesson. And we had to do this just because it's Google Slides. So if you click here, it'll take you to source A, right? And this is the first source. This is you just saw that image on the video that we were watching. And so what you're going to do here with your partner is you're going to analyze this. And you can analyze this by dragging these highlighter strips onto the document, or you can also click here, and this is a handout for those of you who prefer using graphic organizers with students. You can also just document your analysis here. We're asking you to analyze using these four literacy skills. First, let's source each document. A lot of these are photos. So who's the artist? Who's the photographer? What year was this created? Now, a lot of these don't have a year and author, so a lot of these are going to be blank. And then where was this created? And then what claim are they making as it relates to our inquiry question, costs and benefits of urban growth in LA, right? So a photographer is taking a photo of a deforested redwood patch of land in California with a purpose, right? There is a purpose there. And so that would be my evidence, right? I would say that this artist is making an argument that this is a cost of urban growth. My evidence is the photo, and then I would again put it in the category. So you could use this, or you could just annotate directly onto the slides themselves. Okay, and then you'll see source B, and it goes on and on and on. All right, so let me get you all set up here. I know that we have a link to this, to the folder. Maybe we don't. So let me get that for you. I'm sorry, folks.
Down here, just put it in the chat.
There it is. Okay, so Mark put the link to this in your chat. All right. So when you get into breakout room 2, for example, you and your 3 other partners are going to pull up the breakout room 2 DBQ poster activity. And you'll see the sort of directions there, what I just showed you, and then you'll see all the sources. Okay, so all I'm going to ask you to do for the next let's say 10 minutes. This is going to be quick because these are a lot of visuals. Is to go through with your group and see if you can analyze all of these sources and sort them into one of those categories. Okay, and as you do that, you can start dragging the sources here to one category or the other. Okay, we'll come back in 10 minutes and then we'll debrief. We'll talk about the thesis piece and some extension. All right. Okay, does anybody have any questions before we send you off into your breakout rooms? Okay, I'm glad because we are short on time. Listen, Mark is going to go ahead and open up those breakout rooms for you all. And there you go. So go ahead and click join, and you'll be sent into your breakout room. We'll see you back here in 10 minutes. I know, not enough time. And I apologize for that, everyone. You know, we want to be respectful of the time. It is Thursday, and you've had a long day of teaching. Hopefully you sort of got the gist of this. I'm going to share a couple of more things, and then I want to pause for a debrief, and all those questions that you might have, you could ask. And I could also give you some pointers based on my experience using this. Now, I use this in high school. I think that a lot of us are elementary, middle, so we could talk about adapting it for the younger grades as well. So One of the things that students do, and probably the most challenging part of this, aside from like sorting the sources, is collaborating on a thesis. And the strategy that I found is really effective with students I used to teach is this chicken foot thesis. Now, have any of you seen this? It has been made popular by the DBQ project, but I believe it has origins earlier than the DBQ project. My students kind of liked the visual. And so when I would teach them to create their thesis, it would kind of look like this at the beginning. Whoops. And then I would ask them to rephrase the prompt as a statement. The costs and benefits, you know, they could even take a stance. So they can say the costs outweigh the benefits in the 1920s. Right, and for these reasons, and they could have 2 claims. I don't want 1 claim. I'd always ask them at least give me 2, but I always would shoot for 3, because the students I was working with were still sort of like in the early stages of becoming good writers, of you know, being able to put together a longer, more in-depth essay. And for me, I needed the structure at the beginning of the year, and then slowly taking away some of that structure and letting them come up with more than 3 claims if they wanted, or 2 claims, and sort of elaborate that way. There's another strategy that you can build in here, and I've heard it called by teachers the chicken foot and claws approach. And the claws then would be these like sources here that would sort of hang off of each claim. So if my claim is the benefits outweigh the costs because we got, you know, homes, right? People had beautiful homes, and that would be like source E, and I would just drop source E there, right? So you could add the clause would be like the evidence. All right, does anybody have any questions or comments at this point about the writing of the thesis, or maybe some other strategies that you might recommend here? Okay, well, feel free, if something rings a bell, feel free to drop it in the chat. And we're going to go ahead and get into our debrief here. We'll talk about extensions for this as well. Okay, any comments, questions, confusion about the DBQ poster? It's a good time to unmute and ask. I was in a breakout room with Elizabeth for a few minutes. And one of the things that I shared is, and this might be actually useful if you teach elementary students, Amparo has used this with elementary, so I'm gonna stop talking for a minute and let her go after I make this point. When I use this with students who are like EL1, EL2, what I would do is I would have it very structured. So everybody would be in groups, and then I would say, okay, every group is reading source A, and you have 10 minutes. And then in 10 minutes, I would check in, what did we learn about the source, or what's the evidence pointing us to? And we sort of do this bigger discussion as a group to clarify any sort of misunderstandings or things that students weren't getting about the source. And then I would just kind of structure it that way. That takes a lot of time, but there's a lot of benefits there for students who kind of need those extra supports. So you can have it structured like that too with your little ones, right, Amps? It might work well with them.
Yeah, and I also think that because this is so literacy heavy, that you could definitely, when you're doing your information, you know, unit, informational reading and writing, you can definitely squeeze some of that time for your reading pieces in your writing and add them to your social studies, so that if you're having them once a week, you could increase it to 2 times a week, and it's gonna work, right? The other thing that I did was, obviously, I would look for sources, and I would a lot of times rewrite sources. Now you have UCLA, you have Reword, right? To make sure that the kids can handle the reading. So it does, on your part as a teacher, it does mean you have to edit or find Reword or UCLA for some of those sources. But I also made sure that, like, I told Danny I cheated a lot, and I made sure that my kids who needed something that was shorter for reading would be able to get the reading that was less difficult or easier, and that way I kind of was sneaky that way so that they wouldn't struggle as much. So I definitely differentiated the readings or the handouts that I gave them.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Amparo. I've seen Amparo do this with a group of elementary teachers in Compton Unified, and they really love that. The poster was about the Tongva and about Indigenous Americans, and it was really well received. Okay, well, if anybody has any questions at this point, you can drop them in the chat. I know we have 3 minutes left, but feel free to ask away. I'm gonna just kind of move us on as we wrap up here to point out a couple of things. Christina, did you want to mention something?
Yeah, we were just a little confused. The category banners, was that where you're supposed to put the source under the category banners?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Those categories for this one would be cost benefits, and then the evidence would be aligned to those.
Okay, because we had 4 category banners and we thought that it was cost and benefits, and then we couldn't figure out what the other 2 categories were.
Yeah, and that's because I sped through the directions because of time. But what I was going to say is sometimes your prompt doesn't have categories in it, and students have to tease that out of the sources, right? And that's complex. And when that happens, sometimes a group will have 2 categories, and you'll have a group that has 5 categories, right? And so I left those on the side just in case the group said, "Hey, you know what? There's another category here, maybe uncertain or deforestation that I want to have." And so that's why that was there. Sorry about the confusion.
Okay. No, that's thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so just a couple of final words. In my experience, this really reduces anxiety and frustration that I've seen my students struggle with when they're looking at primary source individually, or when they get a stack of them, they have to read them. Kind of working with other students, it allows them to sort of make mistakes and wait for somebody else to talk if needed. So that's really good. It really promotes good historical thinking. It supports students in starting to create a thesis, and it's a scaffold for a longer essay, a longer writing piece. And so I'm previewing this for the next time. We're going to show you an 11-sentence paragraph. It works really well with the DBQ poster. It's basically a 5-paragraph essay shrunken into 11 sentences. It's a really good scaffold. For the younger kids, we have an 8-sentence paragraph that Amparo has created that does very similar things, but it gives you the sort of like the bones of a good essay, which is what's your claim, what's your evidence, what's the commentary on that claim and evidence, and how it does it relate to the inquiry question. 6:29, folks. I need to move us on, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it to my colleague. Amparo's going to talk to you a little bit about some upcoming events.
So you already know about the Increasing Literacy and Engagement series. We want to welcome you back to our last series, which will be about writing. For those of you who are middle school and high school teachers, we're going to have a wonderful workshop this summer on thinking about democracy and power. And these are the 3 places. You can feel free to already register. And then this one I'm really excited about. The next one, Danny, is we are offering you free films, 3 incredible documentaries. The first one's about deforestation and the effects of a community, deforestation, the effects of Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico, and a community of youth that organized to rebuild. It's free to you. It's showing tomorrow at 4. You just have to get a link and you can watch it. You don't have to join the Teacher Institute. So please register. It's absolutely free. As you know, they're not free because producers like to make money, and your school would have to get, a license. So this is an opportunity for you as teachers. We'd love to see some of you at the Institute as well, right? And then this is a link tree for you. Please, please, please sign up for our listserv so that you can get updates on other workshops that we and our state partners run, and sometimes even some of our other community partners send us information about workshops and activities that you can join.
And we just want to thank you all for being here with us 1 minute after. We really appreciate it. Mark is putting all these links in the chat for you, but thank you. And if you want to just shout out somebody who is in your breakout room today, feel free to do it in the chat or unmute. And we'll see you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday and get some rest.